Hello friends, welcome back to our channel. In today's video, I will discuss the effect of change in the income and the price on consumers' equilibrium. It basically culminates into three kinds of effects. First one is income effect, second one is substitution effect, and third one is the price effect. In case of income effect, what happens if there is a change in the income of the consumer, how it will affect the consumer's equilibrium. That when the relative prices of the commodities remains constant. This is what is income effect that we will discuss today in depth. Then we have substitution effect and price effect. These two I will discuss in subsequent videos. So moving on to the income effect, whenever we talk about the income, categorization of the goods becomes must and very important. So here also we have to divide the category of the goods into normal and to the inferior. Okay, because the effect of income will not be same for the normal goods and the inferior goods. It will be different. So the consumption pattern will also be different. So what happens in case of the change in income on the normal goods? Let us see under this panel. In this first panel, here we can see that originally the budget line is AB. We have discussed about budget line and indifference curve and how we get the equilibrium in the previous video. So if you have not watched that video, go to the previous video. Okay, so here initially we have AB as the budget line and I see one curve which is considering or tangent to AB at point E. That becomes the original equilibrium, and at this point we can see OX1 and OY1 is the commodity of both the goods, the quantity of both the goods that is under consumption. Then there is, let us say, there is increase in the income from AB to A1B1. So budget line shifts to A1B1 and it becomes tangent with the higher level of indifference curve, that is IC2, and here we get the new equilibrium. And from there, if we draw a line, then we will see that the x-axis, the new quantity is OX2, and on the y-axis we have a new quantity of OY2, which is greater than the previous one. So simply, increase in the income have a positive effect on the consumption pattern, and the new consumer's equilibrium that we receive or that we get gives us the higher quantity of both the goods in question. So simply increase in income have a positive effect on the normal goods, and what happens that the satisfaction of the consumer increases. Why? Because he then attains the higher level of indifference curve. Then he can purchase goods at the higher level of indifference curve, and we know that the higher level of indifference curve gives higher satisfaction. So what will happen if there is decrease in the income? So simply there will be the reverse action. Let us say if the income budget line was A2B2, that is the highest one, at that point we have E3 as the equilibrium at IC3, indifference curve 3, and there was a shift in the income and it decreased, and it decreased in such a way that we have a new budget line which is downwards A2 and A1 and B1. So in this case we reach the lower indifference curve. So simply income effect on the normal good was positive. But in case of inferior good, what happens? If there is, let us see, the original income is, let us say that the original income is M1 and N1. Okay, and at that point M1 and N1 we have the equilibrium at E1. Okay, this is the equilibrium. At that level we were getting the quantity OX2. Thus X is the inferior good here and Y is the superior good. But what happens? There is increase in the income from M1 N1. We have higher income of M1 N3 and we have a new budget line M1 and N3. Okay, here we get the new equilibrium E3 because M1 and 3 budget line is tangent to the higher IC curve 2 at E3. So this is a newer budget line. But here you can see if you draw a line parallel with this on the x-axis you get x1, OX1 quantity which is lesser than OX2. So what is happening? But on y-axis which is increasing. So what happens here? We see that with increase in income, the quantity of the inferior goods that you were purchasing were decreased. So the consumer is here actually decreasing his demand for the inferior goods. Okay, that is where the equilibrium is. However, the equilibrium is on a higher indifference curve, but the point gives us lower quantity of the inferior goods. So from here we can see that the income effect on inferior goods is reversed and it is negative. Increase in income, if there is increase in the income, there is a decrease in the demand or quantity demanded for inferior goods. So there is a reverse relationship between these two and that is why there is a negative relationship. And if we look at the curve, let me clarify this. If we look at the curve, then we will see what kind of curve we get here. Joining the E joining these curves, if we look at this point E to E1, it is in the shape of little bit of S, okay, and it is not the IC curve, income consumption curve here is taking the shape of slightly like this S, means it is not positive, okay. So this is what the income effect tells us about the normal goods and the inferior goods. And moving on to the next one, here we will discuss about the possible shape that of the income consumption curve. What is income consumption curve? When we have various levels of equilibrium on different IC curves, if we join together all of those points, then we get the income consumption curve. So in case of normal goods, since the relationship between the income and the normal goods were positive, with the increase in income, we were going to the higher level of IC curve. So here, if we plot that, what we will get? The higher income gives us higher budget lines and also newer and higher level of equilibrium. Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Okay. So in the first case, when the original income was P1, L1 and the IC curve L1 and equilibrium was at Q1, right? But with increased income, it is P2, L2 and we have a new equilibrium which is Q2 which is higher than Q1. So similarly, we can see that there is a constant increase and vice versa. We can also see that there is, if we want to consider there is a decrease in the income, then we can consider that there is a downward movement. So either ways, downward or upward, it is a positive, and that's why we have this positive curve, positive income consumption curve in case of normal goods. But what happens in case of inferior goods? The consumption curve it's not a positive, rather it is negative, and it is somewhat like this. It is in a shape of a curve. Why? Because when the original income was P1 L1 and we have the equilibrium at Q1, because P1 L1 budget line was tangent to the IC curve 1 at the point Q1. but there was an increase in the income and we get a new budget line P2L2 which is higher than P1L1 and we got a new IC curve that was IC2. Okay, and here we can see that the equilibrium is Q2. Now if you look at the Q2 and draw a line parallel on this, okay, so we can see that the quantity demanded of good X has not increased. It is almost the same. Okay, but even with more increase in the income, we get a new Q3 and here clearly we can see that the quantity demanded for the good X is even lesser. So it is getting lesser and lesser as there is increase in the income because good X here we consider as inferior good. So with the increase in income, there is a fall in the quantity demanded for inferior good, and that is why the equilibrium points that we are getting is getting closer to y-axis. And if we join together all of these equilibrium points, that is Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, we get this shape of the indifferent income consumption curve, which is not at all positive, but we can see that it is bent and it is bending and moving more towards the y-axis. So that shows there is a negative relationship between the income and the inferior goods, and that is why the income consumption curve is also negative in this case, but in case of normal goods, income consumption curve is positive. So the change in the income affects the consumer's equilibrium in this way that in case of normal goods, the consumer equilibrium will be higher, satisfaction level will be higher, and in case of the inferior goods, there also the satisfaction level of the consumer is getting higher, but the consumption pattern for inferior goods is getting lower and lower. So this is all about income effect, and we will discuss about substitution and price effect in the next lecture. Thank you.